In this short video, we're going to have a look at how we can make a slot. A slot lets us take a flat piece of card and create something that will stand up and can actually make a surprisingly strong structure. So, tools that we're going to need to do this, we're going to need our piece of card, we're going to need a pair of scissors, we're going to need a sharp pencil, we're going to need a ruler, and we're going to need a set square. Now, I always when I'm working with class of children, I always work with the same tools that they have. There's no point you pulling out your fancy scissors if they don't have access to them. So to start off, I'm going to take my pencil and my ruler and I'm going to draw the first of my squares. Now I'm going to work, I don't want to assume that the edge of the cardboard is straight, so I'm not going to work right at the edge, but I want to work reasonably close to the edge because I don't want to waste cardboard. And I'm going to draw a straight line that is 4 centimeters exactly. And I always talk to the children about how this first line, this baseline, is the most important. If you get your baseline right, then the rest of the shape will work out a lot better. Then I'm going to use my set square, and I'm going to use the right angle here on the set square. I'm going to place my set square along one of the straight edges along the baseline, shuffle it along until the right angle is just at the end of my line. And I'm just going to put a little mark up the side, which you'll see when my hands are out of the way, a little mark up the side. And then with my ruler, I'm going to draw a 4 centimeter line up there. Now, one little tip is when you're drawing a line like this, always put your pencil on the starting point first. And that means you can get your ruler lined up, and my line is going to go through that mark that I drew. Okay, so there's my first line. Always a good idea, get the children in the habit of just checking that right angle, okay, making sure that they're happy with the accuracy of that right angle. I'm going to do my second right angle, so set square along the baseline, put my little mark up. In later videos, and as the children get older, I would teach them how to do the right angle with a protractor. But just for now, a set square is as accurate as we need. I'm going to do my 4 centimeter line going through the mark, and then I'm going to finish off by joining the 2 corners at the top, and that's my check. If that line is exactly 4 centimeters, whoops, get it right. If that line is exactly 4 centimeters, then I can be confident that my square is pretty much perfect. Now, to find the center of my square, I'm going to draw a line from diagonal to diagonal and diagonal to diagonal. This is a really quick way of finding the exact center of the square, which we're going to need later on. I'm going to draw my second square next to that. I'll do this nice and quickly. So ruler on, I want my second square to be exactly the same size. Now, if I'm working under the visualizer, I'll quite often work in pen for the children because it shows up better and lets them see better what I'm doing. But other than that, I always work with the same tools that they're working. I'm going to do my 2 right angles at the same time this time. I always talk to children about how this might take them a long time to get it absolutely spot on to start with, but very quickly they'll be drawing these squares in no time. And once they can draw an accurate square, that's the key. They can then literally make anything that they want. And I'm going to close my square off at the top, check it's 4 centimeters. And there's my 2 squares that I'm pretty happy with. I'm going to do the same on this one to find the center point. All right, and I can find the exact center of that square. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these out. And this is another real teaching point for the children, is how to cut properly. A number of children that I work with who can't use a pair of scissors properly, can't cut accurately. So the first thing is how you're going to hold the scissors. So I always teach children to hold them with their thumb and their middle finger. That means your first finger can rest on the top, which gives you more strength here and more stamina when you're cutting. My cutting hand always stays anchored on the table. Don't let children cut with the scissors waving around. Anchor that on the table, and your scissors always point forward. We never cut sideways, we never cut towards us. Scissors always point forwards. I'm going to use the inside part of the blade to cut with. Try and avoid cutting with the tips of the blade because it's not as accurate. And so I'm going to start off cutting up my line. Now, as I always say to the children, I have cut thousands and thousands of lines over my life, the course of my life, but I still want my cuts to be as accurate as possible. And so I still work as slowly and accurately as I can, even though I would consider myself quite a competent cutter. You'll see here the little mistake I made. I encourage children not to rub out these mistakes, just leave that, okay? It's a wee learning point as they go through. Now I've cut off the large bit of card first. I want to get rid of as much material as I can when I start cutting, which means now all I've got to work with is this small piece of material, which makes cutting much easier. You can see how I'm constantly turning the cardboard to cut rather than turning the scissors. And I can cut along this line here. And finally, I'm going to cut up the middle to separate my two squares. There's my first square. There is my second square. Okay, so these two squares then, we're going to cut slots into them so that they fit together to stand up. So in order to do this nice and accurately, at the bottom of this one, I want to measure the center of the bottom of it. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So I know it's 4 centimeters long, so the center point is at 2 centimeters. And I'm going to do the same with this one to get the center point at 2 centimeters. And what that lets me do is that gives me my starting point for cutting the slot. Okay, so I'm going to cut my first slot just to the side of where I started, up to the center, and stop. Okay, so there's my first slit cut up, and my second one I'm going to do exactly the same and cut up. And at this point I would always show the children how to join these together. So by slotting these in, okay, we get a nice tight fit. However, what I get is a kind of an X-wing, almost like an X-wing fighter sort of shape, and it's very difficult to open that up. And the reason for this is because the card has thickness, all right? And so what I need to do to get the slot to work properly is I'm going to cut a second line up here, really, and take out a really, really thin slice, a bit too thin, a really thin slice of the card. So you can see now I've got this really thin slice of the card, which I can just take off, and now you can see the difference. This one here, okay, there's no gap. This one here, you can see daylight through the card. I'm going to repeat that on this one. Again, really good to demonstrate this. Demonstrate really careful cutting. Turn it over. There's my little bit that I'm going to break off. Take that bit out, and I've now got my two ready to slot together. Slot them together this time, and now they open into a nice square. And that now will be a really strong structure to build on top of, or to create a partition, or to create a wall.